The bright pink paint dripped down her face like melted cotton candy. Karen stood there in my driveway at 2 in the morning, bolt cutters still gripped in her trembling hands, looking like she had been dipped in a bucket of Pepto-Bismol. Her eyes were wide with shock and fury as she realized what had just happened. 3 months of harassment, 3 months of lies, complaints, and psychological warfare. 3 months of this woman trying to destroy my life over a simple electric vehicle charging port on my own property. But this moment, this beautiful moment of justice covered in washable paint, was worth every sleepless night she had caused me. The security cameras captured every second of her illegal midnight mission. The neighbors' lights were turning on one by one as her screams echoed through our quiet suburban street. That was when I realized that sometimes the system fails you. Sometimes the police cannot help you. Sometimes you have to program your own justice. I pulled into my driveway after another exhausting 12-hour shift at the hospital. My electric vehicle was running dangerously low on battery, showing only 8% charge remaining. The familiar blue glow of my home charging station should have been waiting for me like a beacon of relief. Instead, I found a heavy black padlock wrapped around my charging port. I sat in my car for several minutes, staring at this impossible sight. Someone had actually locked my charging equipment, my personal property, on my own driveway. The metal lock gleamed under my headlights like a middle finger pointed directly at my face. My hands shook as I fumbled for my phone's flashlight. The lock was industrial grade, the kind used on storage units and construction sites. This was not some random act of vandalism. This was planned, deliberate, and meant to send a message. I walked around my property, looking for any other signs of tampering. Everything else appeared normal. My mailbox was untouched. My landscaping was intact. Only my charging station had been targeted with surgical precision. The first person who came to mind was Karen Mitchell from 3 houses down. She had been complaining about my charging station ever since I installed it 6 months ago. But surely even Karen would not stoop to actual vandalism. I decided to check my security cameras before jumping to conclusions. The footage would tell me everything I needed to know. What I saw made my blood run cold. There was Karen, clear as day, creeping across my property at 2:15 in the morning 3 days ago. She was dressed in all black like some kind of suburban ninja, carrying a toolbox and measuring tape. The timestamp showed she spent nearly 40 minutes on my property, carefully examining my charging station and testing different locks until she found one that fit perfectly. She had planned this attack with military precision. I watched the footage again, focusing on her face. There was no hesitation, no guilt, no second guessing. Karen moved with the confidence of someone who believed she had every right to sabotage my property. She even smiled when the lock clicked into place. I tried calling Karen immediately, but she did not answer. I tried knocking on her door, but she pretended not to be home despite her car sitting in the driveway and lights glowing throughout her house. The next morning, I called a locksmith. The removal would cost $300 and take 2 hours, but that was just the beginning of my problems. My charging station had cost me $3,000 to purchase and install. It was completely legal, properly permitted, and installed entirely on my own property. Karen had just committed a felony. As I waited for the locksmith, I researched everything I could find about Karen Mitchell. What I discovered painted a disturbing picture of a woman who had made controlling her neighbors into a full-time obsession. The locksmith arrived at 8 in the morning with a knowing look on his weathered face. He had seen situations like this before. "Neighbor dispute?" he asked, examining the heavy-duty padlock. Something like that, I replied, watching him work. This is a $60 lock on a $3,000 charging station. Whoever did this wanted to make a statement, not just cause inconvenience. His words hit me harder than I expected. This was not about the charging station. This was about power, control, and Karen's twisted need to dominate everyone around her. After the locksmith left, I decided to do some investigative work of my own. I started with Tom and Susan, my immediate neighbors to the left. They had always been friendly, but seemed nervous whenever Karen's name came up in conversation. "Oh, you are having problems with Karen too?" Susan asked, her voice dropping to a whisper even though we were standing on my own front porch. "She locked my charging station." Tom's face darkened. "That woman is completely out of control. She filed 17 complaints against us last year. 17. Our mailbox was the wrong color. Our hedge was 6 inches too tall. Our dog barked twice during approved daytime hours." Susan nodded vigorously. "She takes pictures of everything. She has a whole filing system of surveillance photos organized by address and violation type. She showed them to me like she was proud of her detective work." "What did the city say about her complaints?" "Most got dismissed, but the process was exhausting. We had to take time off work, hire contractors, attend hearings. She knew exactly how to weaponize the bureaucracy against us." I walked down the street, knocking on doors and asking careful questions. The pattern that emerged was chilling. Mrs. Chen from the corner house had been harassed for months over her vegetable garden. Karen claimed it violated neighborhood aesthetic standards and lowered property values. The harassment only stopped when Mrs. Chen's husband threatened legal action. The Johnsons had been targeted for their teenage son's car, which Karen deemed too loud despite being completely stock and street legal. She filed noise complaints every single day for 3 months until the family installed additional soundproofing in their garage. Even elderly Mr. Peterson had not been spared. Karen had convinced the city to investigate his bird feeders as a potential health hazard, forcing the 78-year-old man to spend his retirement savings on legal fees to prove his hobby was perfectly legal. Every neighbor had a story. Every family had been touched by Karen's campaign of control and intimidation. But they all suffered in silence, too afraid of escalation to fight back effectively. The most disturbing revelation came from Karen's own husband, David, whom I encountered at the grocery store 2 days later. "I am sorry about the charging station thing," he said quietly, glancing around nervously. "She has become obsessed with controlling the entire neighborhood. I have tried talking to her, but she will not listen to reason anymore." "Why does she care so much about my charging port?" David's shoulders sagged with exhaustion. "She thinks it makes the neighborhood look too modern, too technological. She wants everything to look like it did when we moved here 15 years ago. She spends hours every day documenting changes and filing complaints." "This has to stop." "I know. I have been trying to get her to seek help, but she thinks everyone else is the problem. She sees herself as the neighborhood's protector, saving property values from decline." That afternoon, I consulted with a lawyer about my options. The news was discouraging. "Technically, she committed vandalism and trespassing," the attorney explained. "But the legal process will take months, cost thousands of dollars, and might only result in a small fine or community service. So she can just keep harassing me with impunity." Unfortunately, the system is not designed to handle this type of sophisticated psychological harassment. Individual incidents seem minor, but the cumulative effect can be devastating. I left the lawyer's office feeling defeated and angry. Karen had found the perfect loophole in our justice system. She could make my life miserable using technically legal harassment while facing minimal consequences for her criminal acts. That was when Karen decided to escalate her campaign. Karen's next move was calculated and cruel. Every morning when I left for work, she would move her car to block my driveway, forcing me to park on the street and walk several blocks to access public charging stations. When I confronted her about it, she claimed she was just visiting different neighbors and had every right to park on the public street. "I am not blocking your driveway," she said with a smug smile. "I am parked legally on the city street. If you do not like it, call the police." I did call the police. They measured the distance and confirmed her car was technically parked legally, even though her intent was obviously malicious. The officer looked sympathetic but explained his hands were tied by the exact letter of the law. "She knows exactly what she is doing," he admitted privately, "but being annoying is not illegal." The parking harassment was just the beginning. Within a week, Karen had installed 2 motion-activated security cameras pointed directly at my property. The cameras were positioned to capture my front door, my windows, and my driveway with military precision. Every time I stepped outside my house, I could hear the cameras whirring and clicking as they tracked my movements. The psychological effect was immediate and crushing. I felt like a prisoner in my own home, constantly watched and judged by an unstable neighbor who had appointed herself as my personal warden. I researched the privacy laws and discovered Karen was violating several statutes, but the legal process to force removal would take months and cost thousands of dollars. She knew I would have to endure the surveillance while the courts slowly moved toward justice. The complaints started arriving faster than I could respond to them. My mailbox was apparently the wrong shade of blue and violated neighborhood standards. My grass was allegedly too long, even though I had mowed it 2 days earlier. My garbage cans were positioned incorrectly, creating an eyesore that damaged property values throughout the street. Each complaint required a response, a hearing, or an inspection. I started taking time off work to deal with Karen's manufactured crises. My boss began questioning my reliability as I missed meetings to attend bogus hearings about my perfectly legal and properly maintained property. The complaints were clearly coordinated and systematic. Karen had done her research, identifying every possible angle of attack through city regulations and homeowner association rules. She knew exactly which departments to contact and which buzzwords would trigger investigations. But her masterstroke was recruiting other neighbors through fear and misinformation. Karen began spreading rumors that my charging station was a fire hazard that could burn down the entire neighborhood. She claimed the electrical installation was illegal and dangerous, even though it had been inspected and approved by licensed professionals. She organized coffee meetings with newer residents who did not know me personally. She presented herself as a concerned, long-time resident trying to protect everyone from a reckless neighbor who was endangering their families and their property values. 3 families signed a petition demanding the removal of all electric vehicle charging equipment from the neighborhood. Karen presented this petition to the Homeowner Association Board with great fanfare, calling for emergency action to protect the community. The hearing was a nightmare. Karen had prepared a PowerPoint presentation complete with photographs, property value data, and fire safety statistics. She spoke for 20 minutes about the dangers of residential charging stations, carefully avoiding any mention of her illegal surveillance and harassment campaign. When it was my turn to respond, I felt unprepared and overwhelmed. I had not expected such a sophisticated attack on my character and my legal right to charge my vehicle at home. The board ultimately sided with me, recognizing that my installation was legal and properly permitted. But the damage was done. Several neighbors now viewed me with suspicion and fear, wondering if Karen might be right about the dangers I posed to their safety. My work performance continued to suffer as transportation became a daily struggle. Karen's parking harassment meant I could never rely on home charging. Public charging stations were often broken or occupied, making me late for important meetings and medical procedures. My supervisor called me into her office to discuss my declining punctuality and focus. "Is everything okay at home?" she asked with genuine concern. I tried to explain the situation, but it sounded crazy even to my own ears. How do you tell your boss that a neighbor's obsessive harassment campaign is destroying your career? How do you quantify the psychological toll of constant surveillance and manufactured crises? The final straw came when Corinne crossed the ultimate line. My 74-year-old mother was visiting for my birthday celebration. She had flown across the country to spend a few precious days with me, and I was determined to make her visit perfect despite the ongoing neighborhood war. Karen was waiting for us when we returned from dinner. "Excuse me," she called out, marching across the street with purpose. "I need to speak with you about your illegal charging station." My mother looked confused and a little frightened as this stranger approached us aggressively in my own driveway. "This is my mother," I said firmly. "She is visiting for my birthday. This is neither the time nor the place for your complaints." Karen ignored me completely and addressed my mother directly. "Do you know your son is endangering this entire neighborhood? That charging station is a fire hazard that could kill innocent families. I have been trying to get him to remove it for months, but he refuses to listen to reason." My mother, bless her heart, tried to diffuse the situation politely. "I am sure there has been some misunderstanding. My son is very responsible and would never do anything dangerous." "Your son is selfish and reckless," Karen snapped. "He cares more about his fancy electric car than the safety of his neighbors. Someone is going to get hurt because of his negligence." That was the moment something broke inside me. My mother spent the rest of her visit looking over her shoulder, jumping at every sound, afraid that Karen might appear at any moment with more accusations and hostility. The woman who had raised me to be strong and independent was reduced to a nervous, frightened shadow of herself because of one neighbor's psychological terrorism. On the morning of my mother's departure, she pulled me aside with tears in her eyes. "Honey, I do not think I can visit you again until this situation is resolved. That woman scares me, and I do not want to cause more problems for you." My heart shattered as I watched my mother's taxi pull away. Karen had successfully driven away the person I loved most in the world. She had weaponized my mother's visit, turning a celebration into a trauma that would prevent future visits. That afternoon, I discovered Karen had escalated her surveillance to actual trespassing. While reviewing my security footage, I found videos of Karen entering my backyard at night, using a flashlight to photograph my charging station from different angles. She had been collecting evidence for her harassment campaign by illegally accessing my private property. The footage showed her measuring distances, taking notes, and even testing the electrical connections with some kind of handheld device. She was treating my backyard like her personal crime scene investigation, gathering ammunition for future attacks. I called the police immediately, demanding that Karen be arrested for trespassing and stalking. The responding officer reviewed the footage and agreed that Karen's behavior was clearly illegal. "This is definitely criminal trespassing," he confirmed. "But you need to understand, she will probably just get a citation and a court date. The judge might give her community service or a small fine. She is destroying my life, and you are telling me the punishment is community service." The legal system was not designed to handle this type of sophisticated harassment. Each individual incident seems minor, but the cumulative effect can be devastating. I had heard those exact words from my lawyer. The system was failing me completely. Meanwhile, Karen's husband David approached me with devastating news about his wife's mental state. "She has been taking medication for anxiety and depression," he confided during a chance encounter at the mailbox. "But I think the dosage needs adjustment. She has become paranoid and obsessive about controlling everything around her. Can you get her help?" "I have been trying, but she refuses to admit there is a problem. She thinks everyone else is crazy, and she is the only sane person trying to maintain order." David's revelation explained Karen's behavior but made her even more dangerous. She was not just malicious, she was mentally unstable and unpredictable. The situation reached a new low when my employer called me into a disciplinary meeting. "We have received complaints about your reliability and professionalism," my supervisor explained. "Your frequent absences and tardiness are affecting patient care and team morale." I tried to explain the transportation issues caused by Karen's harassment, but it sounded like excuses and deflection. How could I tell my boss that a neighbor's campaign of psychological warfare was destroying my career in healthcare? "We value you as an employee, but these performance issues need to improve immediately. Consider this a formal warning." Walking to my car after that humiliating meeting, I realized Karen was winning. She was systematically destroying every aspect of my life using a combination of legal harassment, psychological manipulation, and strategic use of bureaucratic systems. That night, I sat in my living room staring at Karen's surveillance cameras pointed at my windows. The red recording lights blinked like evil eyes, reminding me that I was never truly alone or safe in my own home. I thought about my mother, too frightened to visit her own son. I thought about my job, hanging by a thread because of transportation sabotage. I thought about my neighbors, too intimidated to speak out against Karen's reign of terror. The police could not help me. The courts would take months to provide minimal relief. My employer was losing patience with my Karen-induced problems. The homeowner association was powerless against her sophisticated manipulation tactics. I was completely alone in this fight. That was when I made a decision that would change everything. I walked out to my driveway and stared at my charging station. Karen had turned this simple piece of equipment into a weapon against me. She had used it to justify months of harassment, surveillance, and psychological torture. But what if I could turn her weapon against her? What if I could use her obsession with my charging station to finally catch her in the act and expose her criminal behavior to the entire neighborhood? What if I could program my own justice? I spent the rest of the night researching electronic security systems, paint-based deterrent devices, and the legal boundaries of protecting private property from repeated criminal attacks. By dawn, I had a plan. I started my research with legitimate home security systems, studying how motion detectors, pressure sensors, and tamper alarms worked. But I needed something more dramatic, something that would create undeniable evidence of Karen's criminal behavior while ensuring maximum witnesses to her actions. That was when I discovered paint-based security systems used by banks and armored car companies. These devices released bright, washable paint when triggered by unauthorized access attempts. The paint served multiple purposes. It marked the criminal for easy identification, created psychological shock that stopped the crime in progress, and provided irrefutable evidence of criminal intent. The beauty of the system was its proportional response. Karen would not be physically harmed, but she would be publicly marked and humiliated in a way that matched the psychological damage she had inflicted on me and my neighbors. I consulted with 3 different lawyers to ensure my plan remained within legal boundaries. If someone repeatedly trespasses on your property and tampers with your equipment, you have the right to install reasonable security measures, the first attorney confirmed. A paint-based deterrent system would likely be considered reasonable force to protect property. The second lawyer was more cautious, but agreed that my plan was legally defensible. The key is proportionality and documentation. Make sure the paint is washable and non-toxic. Install warning signs about security measures. Keep detailed records of all previous incidents. If you can prove a pattern of criminal behavior, your response becomes more justifiable. The third attorney was enthusiastic about my creative approach. Frankly, this is brilliant. You are not causing permanent harm, but you are creating consequences for behavior that the legal system has failed to address adequately. Just make sure everything is documented with video evidence. I spent 2 weeks designing and building my paint delivery system. The device was elegantly simple. Pressure sensors would detect unauthorized tampering with my charging port, triggering a small compressed air system that would release bright pink paint in a targeted spray pattern. The paint was the same washable, non-toxic formula used by elementary schools for art projects. I chose bright pink specifically because it was impossible to hide or explain away. Karen would be marked like a graffiti artist caught in the act, visible to every neighbor and impossible to deny. The system was programmed with multiple safeguards to prevent accidental activation. It would only trigger after 3 separate tamper attempts within a 5-minute window, ensuring that accidental contact would not cause problems. A hidden reset switch allowed me to disarm the system when I needed to use my own charging equipment. I installed additional security cameras with night vision capabilities and motion-activated floodlights to ensure complete documentation of whatever happened. Every angle would be covered, every moment recorded in high-definition video that could serve as evidence in court. Warning signs were strategically placed around my property, clearly stating that the area was under electronic surveillance and protected by security measures. I wanted to give Karen every opportunity to reconsider her criminal behavior before triggering my deterrent system. The legal consultation had been thorough. I researched every case law precedent involving property protection devices. I documented every instance of Karen's previous harassment, creating a comprehensive file that proved her pattern of criminal behavior. Most importantly, I made sure the paint system was completely safe. The compressed air pressure was set to the minimum level needed for effective paint delivery. The paint formula was tested to ensure it would wash off easily with soap and water. Medical safety data sheets confirmed the paint was non-toxic and safe for skin contact. I even tested the system on myself, triggering a small amount of paint to make sure it caused no physical harm or permanent staining. The pink paint washed off my hands completely within 10 minutes of normal scrubbing. My plan was elegant in its simplicity and poetic in its justice. Karen had spent months using my charging station as justification for harassment, surveillance, and psychological torture. She had repeatedly trespassed on my property to photograph and tamper with my equipment. She had cost me money, time, career advancement, and precious visits from my mother. Now my charging station would become the instrument of her exposure and humiliation. I installed the system on a Thursday night, working carefully in the darkness to avoid detection by Karen's surveillance cameras. Every connection was tested multiple times. Every sensor was calibrated precisely. Every camera angle was verified for optimal coverage. By Friday morning, my trap was set. All I had to do was wait for Karen to take the bait. Based on her established pattern of behavior, I knew she would not be able to resist tampering with my charging equipment again. Her obsession with controlling my property was stronger than her fear of consequences. The waiting was the hardest part. Every night, I lay awake listening for the sound of footsteps in my driveway. Every morning, I checked my security footage hopping to see evidence that justice had finally been served. 1 week passed without incident, then another. I began to worry that Karen had somehow detected my security upgrades and changed her pattern of behavior. Maybe David had convinced her to seek professional help. Maybe the threat of criminal charges had finally deterred her from further trespassing. But I underestimated Karen's compulsive need to control everything around her. On a cold Tuesday night in November, my motion sensors detected movement in the driveway. Karen had returned to finish what she started. The motion alert on my phone buzzed at exactly 2:17 in the morning. I grabbed my tablet and watched the live feed as Karen crept across my driveway dressed in dark clothing, carrying a small toolbox and heavy-duty bolt cutters. She moved with the confidence of someone who had done this before, checking over her shoulder occasionally, but clearly believing she owned the night. The infrared cameras captured every detail of her approach as she knelt beside my charging station and began examining the lock mechanism. My heart pounded as I watched her work. She was so focused on her criminal mission that she never noticed the warning signs I had posted around the area or the additional security cameras tracking her every movement. Karen inserted a small pry bar into the charging port housing, testing for weak points where she could attach another padlock. The first pressure sensor detected her tampering, but the system was programmed to require multiple attempts before activation. She moved to a different angle, using her bolt cutters to test the strength of various connection points. The second sensor triggered, recording her escalating criminal behavior. When Karen began trying to disconnect the main power cable, the third sensor activated the paint delivery system. The compressed air released with a sharp hissing sound that made Karen look up in confusion for just a moment before the bright pink paint erupted from the concealed nozzle in a perfect arc across her face and chest. The effect was immediate and spectacular. Karen stumbled backward, dropping her tools and clawing at her face as pink paint dripped from her hair down onto her dark clothing. The motion-activated floodlights triggered simultaneously, illuminating her like a spotlight on a theater stage. For several seconds, she stood frozen in shock, looking like a statue dipped in cotton candy paint. Then the reality of her situation hit her, and she began screaming. "What the hell? What did you do to me? Help! Somebody help me!" Her panicked shouts echoed through the quiet neighborhood, waking dogs and turning on lights in houses up and down the street. Karen spun in circles, trying to wipe paint from her eyes while only managing to spread it further across her face and hands. "You poisoned me. You tried to kill me. Call the police. Call an ambulance." I watched from my bedroom window as neighbors emerged from their houses in bathrobes and pajamas, drawn by Karen's hysterical screaming. The sight that greeted them was unforgettable. Karen Mitchell, the neighborhood's self-appointed enforcement officer, covered head to toe in bright pink paint and surrounded by criminal tools. Mrs. Chen was the first to speak, her voice carrying clearly across the street. "Karen, what on earth are you doing in his driveway at 2 in the morning? He booby-trapped his property, he tried to murder me. This is assault. This is attempted homicide." Tom and Susan emerged from their house, taking in the scene with barely concealed amazement. The bolt cutters and pry bar lay scattered around Karen's feet like evidence at a crime scene. "Are those your tools, Karen?" Susan asked pointedly. "That does not matter. He attacked me. He poisoned me with chemicals." David Mitchell came running across the street in his pajamas, his face a mixture of embarrassment and resignation. He had clearly been through situations like this before. "Karen, what did you do now?" "I did not do anything. He set a trap. He tried to kill me." The police arrived within minutes, their headlights illuminating the pink-splattered crime scene. Officer Rodriguez, the same policeman who had dismissed my previous complaints about Karen's harassment, stepped out of his patrol car and surveyed the situation. "Ma'am, can you explain why you are covered in paint and standing in this gentleman's driveway at 2 in the morning? He booby-trapped his property. He tried to murder me with toxic chemicals. Arrest him for assault." Officer Rodriguez examined the bolt cutters and pry bar lying on the ground, then looked up at the obvious security cameras recording everything. "Ma'am, are these your tools?" Karen's eyes darted around desperately as she realized the implications of the evidence surrounding her. I was checking to make sure his charging station was safe. I was protecting the neighborhood from a fire hazard by cutting it with bolt cutters at 2 in the morning. I have a right to ensure my property values are protected." Officer Rodriguez turned to me as I approached in my bathrobe, carrying printouts of Karen's previous trespassing incidents. "Sir, can you explain what happened here? She has been harassing me for months, trespassing on my property, and tampering with my charging equipment. I installed a legal security system to protect my property from repeated criminal attacks. The paint is washable and non-toxic, designed to mark trespassers without causing harm." I handed him the file documenting Karen's previous incidents, along with the legal opinions confirming my right to install reasonable security measures. Officer Rodriguez examined the evidence while Karen continued ranting about assault and attempted murder. The contrast was striking. My calm, documented presentation versus her hysterical, paint-covered accusations. "Ma'am, you are under arrest for criminal trespassing, attempted vandalism, and possession of burglary tools." As the handcuffs clicked around Karen's pink-stained wrists, she turned to the gathered neighbors with desperate fury. "You are all witnesses. He tried to kill me. This is not over. I will sue him for everything he owns." But the neighbors were not buying her victim narrative. They had seen the tools, heard her middle-of-the-night screaming, and witnessed her caught red-handed in criminal activity. Mrs. Chen shook her head sadly. "Karen, you brought this on yourself." Even David looked relieved as his wife was loaded into the police car, pink paint still dripping from her hair onto the patrol car's upholstery. "Officer, I want to apologize for my wife's behavior," he said quietly. "She has been having mental health issues, and I have been trying to get her help. Maybe this will finally convince her to accept treatment." As the police car drove away with Karen still protesting her innocence, the neighborhood fell silent except for the gentle hum of my charging station, working exactly as it was designed to do. Justice had been served, one bright pink drop at a time. The aftermath of Karen's pink paint humiliation spread through the neighborhood faster than gossip at a church social. By morning, everyone knew exactly what had happened and why. The woman who had terrorized multiple families for years had finally been caught in the act of criminal behavior. Karen spent 6 hours in jail before David could arrange bail, giving her plenty of time to think about her choices while wearing paint-stained clothes and facing serious criminal charges. The legal resolution was swift and comprehensive. Karen's court-appointed psychiatrist confirmed that her medication needed immediate adjustment and recommended mandatory counseling for her obsessive behavior patterns. The judge was not sympathetic to her claims of victimization. "Ma'am, you were caught trespassing on private property at 2 in the morning with burglary tools in your possession. The homeowner had every right to protect his property with reasonable security measures." Karen was sentenced to 6 months of probation, 100 hours of community service, mandatory mental health treatment, and full restitution for all damages and legal fees related to her harassment campaign. More importantly, she was required to remove all surveillance equipment pointed at neighboring properties and prohibited from any contact with me or my property. The written apology she delivered was grudging but legally binding. "I acknowledge that my behavior toward my neighbor was inappropriate and illegal. I apologize for the harassment, trespassing, and property damage I caused. I understand that my actions were wrong and commit to respecting property boundaries and neighborhood peace going forward." Within 2 weeks of her arrest, other neighbors began coming forward with their own stories of Karen's harassment. The police investigation revealed a pattern of behavior affecting 7 different families over 5 years. "You did what we were all too afraid to do," Tom confided during a neighborhood barbecue. "She had us all walking on eggshells, afraid of setting her off. Your security system finally gave her consequences for her actions." The homeowner association passed new rules specifically addressing harassment, surveillance, and property interference. Karen's case became the template for protecting residents from future neighborhood bullying. My charging station returned to normal operation, and my career recovered quickly once transportation issues were resolved. My supervisor was understanding once she learned the full story of Karen's sabotage campaign. Most importantly, my mother felt safe visiting again. Her next trip was peaceful and joyful, unmarred by neighborhood drama or fear of confrontation. Karen and David moved away 6 months later, selling their house quietly and relocating to a different state, where David hoped his wife could get a fresh start with proper medical supervision. The new neighbors who bought their house were a young couple with an electric vehicle of their own. When they asked about installing a charging station, I was happy to recommend a contractor and share my security system specifications. "The neighborhood is much more peaceful now," I assured them. "And if anyone gives you trouble about your charging equipment, just remember that sometimes you have to program your own justice." The bright pink stain on my driveway eventually faded, but the lesson remained clear for everyone to see. Harassment and criminal behavior have consequences, even when the system fails to provide them. Sometimes the best security system is simply giving bullies exactly what they deserve.